Thank you so much, Mr. Levitt. It is really bizarre and wonderful to be back here. And what I'd love to do this morning is give you a little bit of a sense of the industry of XR, AR, and VR as I've come to know it, as well as just give you a little bit of a sense of the journey that I had from the academy to where I am now, because as I'm sure many of you aren't quite sure where you're going to be in 5 or 10 years, I certainly wasn't either at the time. And I find that stories of seeing how people have made their way through their professional careers is often a useful one, so I hope that's the case today. And I'm going to be zipping over things, not quite as fast as I'm rewinding through my presentation right now, but it's going to be kind of a high-level overview, and by all means, if anyone wants to dive deeper into any of the things I'm going to touch on, seek me out. As Mr. Levitt mentioned, I'll be at Liz Laverty's class, Mrs. Laverty, throughout C Block, and you can come do some demos there, chat with me. And anyways, let's go right into this. Oh, I didn't realize, you know what? I didn't know that when you rewind through a PowerPoint presentation, if you get to the beginning, it'll then cycle back to the end. So I was like, man, it's taking a long time to get to the beginning of this. Okay, here we are. So I'll start by just jumping into a nice little video that I think kind of summarizes me without too much explanation. This is something that, this was kind of a watershed moment for me where I realized, okay, I have something kind of interesting to bring to this convergence of the fields of architecture and virtual reality. This is a program called Tilt Brush that allows you to sketch inside virtual reality. So if you have a VR headset on, you can be inside this design. And what's kind of cool about Tilt Brush is as you're drawing, it remembers every stroke that you make in the order that you make it. And so then you can play back a drawing you've made and kind of see it all come together, which is really exciting, especially in a field like architecture, where the spatial experience of what it's like to be a human inside a room is such an important part of the experience. And so being able to show people a design process and walk through different design options, different materials, it's a really powerful way to design. And so, just a big overview of architecture. This is kind of the spectrum. This is a slide I use a lot when I'm introducing it to firms and that kind of thing. So virtual reality, of course, is when you are cutting out the real world. All you see is digital content. Augmented reality is when you still see the real world, but there's digital content on top of it. And then there's kind of a spectrum of, you need a powerful PC computer to view everything there. And then there's also just, I'm going to look at something on my phone, and there's that portable mobile option. And VR is still projected to be an $80 billion market by 2025. This is an incredibly fast-growing industry, and just for context, the size of today's desktop PC market is about that. That's both PCs at home, PCs at schools and offices. So it's a really exciting industry to be a part of. Everything's happening very fast, and anyone who's able to keep up with that tide has a lot of great opportunities coming their way. And just because, I'm interested primarily in architecture and theater, but I want everyone to know that regardless of where your interests may lie, there are exciting ways to bring that into the virtual reality world. And if such a thing might interest you, I often find that combining a passion you have with something that's emerging and cutting edge that isn't too defined yet, doesn't have its best practices worked out yet, is a really great way to carve a career out for yourself. But more on that later. So I'm just going to go through these slides really quick, just kind of let it wash over you, but here's some different images of the industries VR is useful in. We have healthcare, we have business, we have art as well as fashion, we have the military, education, very relevant here of course, marketing and sales, real estate, this is a lot of my work here, gaming, Beat Saber's amazing, theater and film, a lot of stuff going on with that right now, and of course, architecture. So that's me, a typical kind of table I end up setting up where I'm trying to show a lot of demos at once. This was a conference in Venice a year ago, which was really fun because I find around the world there's always very different perceptions of technology. And I think a wonderful thing about the Academy is there's a lot of encouragement to travel and engage with other cultures. And technology is one of those places where everyone, especially in the front lines of it, everyone has a different idea of how it should be used to its best ends in the future. But now I'd just like to dive a little bit into how I got to this point where I'm doing all sorts of crazy big projects for a lot of major companies, architecture firms as well as Intel and Samsung, and a lot of big theater companies as well as now I'm in New York City, so I'm working a lot with Broadway and that sort of thing. So, here's one of those really lovely Venn diagrams. Doesn't your brain just want to turn off when you see something like this? But I want to show it just because this is really kind of what it comes down to. There's things you're good at, there's things that you are passionate about, and then there's some kind of career that can be made in that. And I've seen a lot of people who are really good at something, but they don't like it, and they feel like they should just make a career of that because they're good at it. And I've seen things that people are really passionate about that maybe their natural inclination isn't quite there, and they are going to have trouble cutting it in the real world in that capacity. Let's take acting, for example. It's an incredibly competitive industry, and so that can be a real struggle. But somewhere in the middle, if you can find an intersection between your interests and your skills, especially if you're carving out a new medium, that's really where you can shine as a professional. So for me, my overlapping interests for a very long time were architecture, theater, and art to a certain degree. And let's just start with my time at the Academy. This was a place where I learned a lot about what I was passionate about. When I first came here, I was a day student commuting from Bethlehem, New Hampshire. Shout out to anyone from New Hampshire. And honestly though, I often tell people that I'm from Vermont, from New York City, just because it's a simpler way to give people an idea of how I want to be viewed. But when I came here, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do soccer, because soccer is what I've done all my life. And my parents were like, no, the sports are going to get out at weird hours. You need to pick an activity that's going to be consistent. And so I was like, okay, well, geez, I kind of enjoyed a theater class I had in middle school. And so auditioned for the musical that fall, which was West Side Story. And I still have the sweatshirt that I got 15 years ago. It has a nice Academy Theater logo on it. And it says Chino on it, because I got to play Chino in West Side Story. And I still really enjoy the sweatshirt. It's a nice reminder of my roots. That really kicked off a real love of theater, which, of course, Bill Vinton, who was amazing for me, and Mr. Prevost, and on the music side, Mr. Rowe. And then all of that I was getting from theater was an incredible gateway into, I want to just say, creativity. And I've started to feel more confident about trying other new things that I had a little bit of interest in, but wasn't quite sure how to go about it. So I started to take a lot more art classes, all of the darlings, now, 2 of them before, 3 of them now. Flo was in my year, by the way, and it was really incredible to start to build up a certain tolerance for critique. I want to make a really big emphasis on that point, that one of the best tools you can have going out in the professional world is knowing how to be receptive to feedback and not take things too personally. A lot of times when someone's giving you a critique of something you've done, especially something creative, sometimes they're just being mean, but other times, most often, there is some seed of something really useful there. And in my career so far, the people who I've seen flourish the most are the ones who really know how to take good feedback and work that into the work they're doing. So when I went to Syracuse, a lot of the lessons I learned at the Academy continue to apply. Architecture and the critique process there, I found I had a much thicker skin already just for receiving critique than some of the other students. And then, right away I missed theater. There's this kind of weird philosophy at Syracuse, as well as a lot of architecture programs, where they kind of want you to only treat architecture as the only thing in your world. They want you to have this tunnel vision about the entire thing. When in fact, a lot of us who came into architecture, we came into there from other creative disciplines, and I really missed designing things quickly and getting a theater play up on its feet really fast. So I ended up being in a musical my freshman year called Anything Goes, playing Moonface Martin, Priest with a Tommy Gun, which was a ton of fun. And I kind of got in trouble in the architecture department for doing that. And maybe it was just a little bit of rebelliousness in me, but it really made me want to find a way to make that work. So that was with a different student organization. And then some other friends and I in the architecture department who really missed having a fast creative outlet, we created a theater group called WHAT, the Warehouse Architecture Theater, where we were able to produce a lot of shows during my time there, and they're actually still going strong. We founded it in 2006, and they still do original shows and musicals and straight plays, and that was modeled very much after the kinds of experiences I had and loved here at the Academy. So, all this stuff can find its way into your future. And I also started to find that there were certain aspects of the architecture field that I was very well suited for, and other aspects that I was not. I wish I had taken a mechanical drafting course when I was here at the Academy. If I had, I probably would have realized that I am not a very clean draftsman. Of course, when I was taking figure drawing and drawing with charcoal and that kind of stuff, it's totally fine to have smudges everywhere. But in architecture, especially when you're hand drafting, everything should be very clean. And my freshman year, I was like, oh man, there were a lot of people dropping out, and I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out to be an architect. But Then as soon as I started to be allowed to use a computer, which happened in second year, and by the way, I think it was really excellent to keep us away from computers at first, because the more you do with your hands, the more you internalize concepts that can be very abstract when you're on a computer. When I was allowed to start using a computer, I found that my work started to flourish because I was able to design things much more precisely and really get across these ideas. And this becomes a growing theme in my career where I'm like, you know, there's a lot of great designers with wonderful ideas up here and they just have trouble communicating them. So, you know, spoiler alert, my way into VR and other emerging tech was like, is there a way we can use this to help good designers better communicate what's stuck inside their brain? And so then, you know, I wanted to find ways to start to bring these different disparate interests together. I started designing board games when I had all these laser cut pieces of my architecture models where it's like, these are beautiful precision cut pieces. I shouldn't throw these away. I don't want to destroy the planet, like, so I'd find other uses for them and make board games. Obviously the theater stuff was happening. We produced, I think, 5 of my original plays while we were there. And real quick, my first original play was here at the Academy my senior year. I had never written a play before. I just kind of dove in head first. It was a 45-minute quasi-musical with like 100 set changes and light changes, and God bless the tech crew for, you know, making that work, and Mr. Vinton for letting me put it on. But that was a great opportunity to try something. Here at the Academy, you have so many opportunities to try new things, and for goodness sakes, it's okay if you fail. It's okay to try something and fall flat, because this is the time to do it. Because once you start to, for lack of a better term, grow up and find yourself in college in the real world, there's less tolerance for failure. And so right now is the best time to try things out and see what happens. But what I started to find was I really wanted to merge some of my interests. You know, traveling was amazing. When I was here at the Academy, I took Japanese with Messick Sensei, which was wonderful, and I got to go to Japan, and that's where my wife, who was also a student in that 6-person group, we met each other and had a wonderful time. And then also, sorry, just as long as we're talking about teachers, I just want to give a quick shout out to Mr. Irain as well, because we the people and what we learned in debating, that level of communication becomes so important in the professional world. So I also encourage anyone to get involved with debate and anything of that nature. But starting to ramble a little bit here, what this all started to culminate in was my thesis at architecture school, where I wanted to find a way to take what I really loved about theater and architecture and digital design and emerging technology and bring it all together. So in 2009, I was already working with augmented reality, very early webcam versions of it, and I took Fort J, which is on Governor's Island, and did this insane kind of $2.5 billion renovation idea where you take all the sight lines that were done for this War of 1812 fort and used it for theatrical purposes. So all these places where cannons were, it becomes stages and the audience is in the middle, and it was a really cool idea that of course felt very conceptual. But what's amazing now is with virtual reality and emerging technology, this kind of crazy idea can actually start to happen, because you can build virtual reality architecture that people can actually inhabit and do things inside of. So I can actually, if I had the time, I could actually build a virtual reality version of this now that people could actually occupy, which is pretty exciting. And so in the real world, you know, I really enjoyed my thesis and graduating, but then I kind of had that same moment coming into the real world that I initially had going to college, where I was like, oh, again, maybe I'm not cut out for architecture, because I started working for these firms where everything always felt a little bit missing. The architecture program at Syracuse was very master builder, very creative, and then the real world of architecture is often a little bit more bureaucratic, administrative, a little less creative. And my first job, I'm actually grateful for it. So Raphael Vignoli, who's a starchitect, just a mean guy, to put it bluntly. This happens a lot with starchitects. When people build up a certain level of ego, they really like to control everything, and they don't feel bad about belittling people, not for the sake of like critique and receptive feedback, but just because it gives them a bit of a power trip. So this was a firm that I did not enjoy being at, even though we were working on these incredible, you know, $10 billion projects around the world. But what I learned from that was I want to say humility and the ability to be really grateful for basic human kindness at my careers afterwards. So, and you know, it taught me how to treat people. And I have employees and that sort of thing now, and I'm always aware of how it feels to be bullied by a mean person in charge of you. And so it's important to have those kinds of experiences where you recognize the best way to lead. The next firm I worked for is called Zimmer Gunsel Frask Architects, which was a small firm that also had a very large office out in Portland. The New York City office was very small, so we had this very close-knit group of only 12 of us, but all the resources of a much larger firm. And I thought, okay, there's something kind of interesting about that setup. And then when I found myself at Fisher Dax Associates, this was a very nice marriage of interest because Fisher Dax Associates is a firm that only designs theaters. And honestly, when I was at Raphael Vignoli and Zimmer Jones and Frask Architects and the Breadloaf Corporation in Middlebury, Vermont, and VIP Structures in Syracuse, other firms I worked for, one of my first questions I always came in with was, do you guys ever design theaters? Because I really think theaters are a fascinating building type. And they always say like, no, we don't. And so it was really exciting to find myself at a firm. It felt kind of like being at Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, where I was thinking like, oh, instead of floor samples and wall samples, maybe they'll have theater chairs and stage lifts and lights, and that's exactly what they had, which was pretty cool. And there was very quickly an opportunity here, not only to combine those interests in architecture and theater, because a lot of times we need to, go to Broadway shows and study the way that the actors are using the stage and incorporating that into our design work, but also there was a real willingness to use technology in a meaningful way. And so in 2013, the Oculus Rift DK1 came out, and immediately I thought, okay, this is a great way for us to test the sightlines of theaters. So if you're in, row Q, seat 13, what's that view look like to the stage? And so I convinced my boss at the time, Josh Dax, can we get an Oculus Rift just so I can play with this? And he's like, well, only if it's actually going to be useful. And I got it, and then immediately realized, like, oh God, I don't know how to code, I don't know how to use a game engine, and I just kind of dove into it head first. Again, with kind of the same abandon that I had here at the Academy, to just be like, well, the worst that could happen is he tells me that was a really bad investment and he fires me, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but would still be kind of sad. So I learned this game engine, Unity 3D, I learned how to code, which very quickly I realized, even though I'd never done much coding before, it felt a lot. It actually took me back to Japanese class. It had this method of learning that had a structure that was very language-like, and I'm sure a lot of people have said that before. Coding is a lot like learning a new language, so even if you're not learning coding right now, really find a language that you enjoy learning because that will aid you. But anyway, virtual reality was a way to start to test that kind of work, and that got really great responses from my boss, as well as the other clients and collaborators we were working with. And then we started to get some nice press. People started to take notice that we were finding really innovative enterprise uses of new technology, got some nice write-ups, started to work more with Unreal Engine. I'd learned Unity 3D and said, okay, well, let's try this other one because we can be a little more photorealistic with it. And that went really well. And so then very quickly, I started to take those interests and then also branch those out into other things. What are the other design disciplines where architecture learnings might be useful? What are other new technologies that are coming out that start to be relevant? And especially on the architecture side, going back to this notion of being able to occupy virtual spaces and do real things in them, I realized that there was a lot that I could go back to in terms of traditional architectural phenomenology, which is basically what it's like to occupy a space and be inside of it and experience, how vast it is, what the lighting is like, how it feels to look at someone far away across a room. All of these old books that talk about that, it's just as relevant in virtual reality because your body doesn't really care whether you're in a real space or a virtual space. Either way, it's going to be reacting to things like compression and release and different kinds of lighting. So again, starting to find ways to bridge the old and the new. And so most recently, what's been really fun is really getting back to my theater roots. We've been playing with, I want to make sure this isn't too loud. We've been playing with getting actors, some really talented New York City improv comedians, into virtual reality and using avatars to actually put on live performances that can be viewed by people all over the world. And what's exciting about this is it doesn't matter what you look like. You can make your avatar look like anything you want. You can do things like fly, you can change the scale of your characters. And again, we have all of our actors in the same room, but we could have had one actor in San Francisco, one actor in Japan. And the way they all got to work together was really exciting. And it's not, I'm going to show today in Mrs. Laverty's class that there's some great ways to, yeah, this looks kind of David Cronenbergian in a second, but we'll just let it happen. Yeah, so for anyone who wants to try this, I'm going to let you put on what are called Vive trackers, which are a way to kind of check your motion tracking for where your hands are, where your feet are, and then you can see what it's actually like to be inside virtual reality and have this other body that you can manipulate. It's almost a little bit more like puppeteering than traditional acting because there's certain things that always behave a little bit differently. And again, it's this kind of new frontier where everyone's not quite sure what works and what doesn't, but we knew that if we were going to put on theater shows inside virtual reality, we wanted to take advantage of the medium and do things in that medium that you can't do in the real world. This would be very expensive to do here in Fuller Hall. So in virtual reality, very quick, very inexpensive, and again, we got a really nice response from it. So we've got something going on in Tribeca Film Festival in New York City now. I was just at South by Southwest in Austin giving a workshop on how to do this kind of thing. So don't be afraid to do something crazy. Sometimes it doesn't work out, but a lot of times it goes better than you might expect. So last thing I'll plug is just got a little podcast now called XR Dad, and so my wife and I we're both fathers now. I'm a father, she's a wife, mother, and our kids are starting to get to the age where they're really interested in, what's Papa do for work? And being able to show this technology from that educational perspective and help understand complex concepts that typically would not be age appropriate. Like my almost 4-year-old is very interested in biology right now and what happens when he's sick and white blood cells and red blood cells. And there's a VR experience called The Body, which does an incredible job of magic school bus like taking you through what happens when your body's fighting an infection. So that's been really exciting. So in summary, and by the way, check that out, xr-dad.com. There's a few episodes, and we always love chatting with people on that. In fact, I haven't told her this yet, but I really want to get Mrs. Liberty on that podcast as well. But in summary, here's my kid. He started off painting water on boards, and then we started to teach him how to draw in VR. And it's not as big of a leap as you'd think. And I'd say if a 4-year-old can do it, why not the rest of us? But I want you guys to think about, finding things that you're passionate about, finding things that you're skilled at, finding ways to create new categories of careers that you otherwise might not exist. That's really when there's opportunities to stand out and do something really special. Don't be afraid to try new things. Again, here at the Academy, dive headfirst into stuff that you might never want to do otherwise. I'll be honest, I wish when I was here, I wish I'd taken dance. I took gym instead, and I feel like I would have learned a lot more about posture and my body and just, muscle control that would have served me very well as I then went to do, other things like karate and other things like that later in life where that level of body awareness would have been really helpful. So, think about all the new technology that's coming out. Still, let's maintain our personal connections with each other. I don't want this to become too dystopian, but that's kind of a quick summary of where I am now and what I'm up to, and I hope you guys found this a little bit useful. And again, come chat with me if you want to talk about any of this stuff in more detail. Thank you very much.